Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back with my good friend Mike Volkov. Mike, first of all, welcome.
Hey, Tom, always good to spend time with you. Takes me back to the first time I met you, which was, oh my gosh, 2008, I believe. So when you were live tweeting from an event, and I met you then, Tom. And you know what uh, who would have known that now you'd be on Elon Musk's you know, favorite communications technique or social media technique. Look how the world has changed.
That's right. Me and soon to be ex President Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Um, so, Mike, you wrote a blog post series about the Department of Justice's mixed bag on criminal trials recently, a three-part series. I thought it was great. I thought it was somewhat provocative and raised some interesting questions and some important points. So I wanted to see if maybe we could visit around that and where you might see DOJ trial going forward, not only in the FCPA space, but in the antitrust space as well.
Well, I think it's been an interesting time recently because what triggered it was the Antitrust Division lost two cases in a row in the first two trials that they brought for bringing cartel-like wage fixing and no poaching agreements. And they lost both the cases. And then I was also concerned about the Mark Faulkner case in the Boeing investigation. And you and I have done a lot of work on the Boeing case in digging into that. And then on the positive side, I was really struck by the government's victory in the Roger Ung case, with the 1MDB Malaysia sovereign wealth fund. So I was really it was kind of an uneven result, and I know DOJ goes through times like that, and I just felt like there were enough trials out there to talk about what kind of pattern or what kind of effort we're seeing, sort of the positive and the negative messages.
Mike,
So
could we
yeah,
start with what seems to be kind of a deep point of demarcation for DOJ and actually bringing cases or going to trial, which is the 2008 financial crisis? And why was that? Why is that still so significant to the DOJ psyche today?
well, I think the department has never recovered from it, to be honest. Um, when we look back on the early 2000s, and remember, we had the WorldCom, Adelphia, we had all these scandals, and DOJ stepped up and prosecuted Bernie Ebbers, prosecuted Enron, and in Houston, and won those cases. And frankly, the Enron task force was perhaps one of the best models for taking white collar crime, major cases, and doing a thorough investigation. Now, ultimately, they got reversed on the Arthur Anderson case, but along the way, they did win the case against Ken Lay. They did win the case, and obviously, he passed away before getting sentenced in that case. But nonetheless, that was a high watermark, I thought, for the department. And what happened in 2008 to 2009, and I get to use this word because it's a book, was the department became the chicken shit club in the sense that they wouldn't bring the cases that needed to be brought against the higher ups in that responsible for the financial crisis. And I don't know that it was a conscious decision to do that, but they made no effort to organize like a task force, nothing. And to this day, there are people who are upset that the high rollers there who did engaged in mortgage-backed securities got away scot-free. And what happened when you look back on it, and I was very intrigued by it, is they had a trial against two Bear Stearns traders who were pushing what they knew to be fraudulent or about to fall apart or falling apart mortgage-backed securities. And the department messed up. It was in the Eastern District of New York, and they had some discovery losses and things like that. And they lost the trial, and the two were acquitted. And then from that point on, the department just vanished. And so I think the department has been taking it on the chin, because how many times, I mean, we still hear about it in, in the last political campaign, or, going back to 2016, whatever, we've heard criticism of the Department of Justice for failure to bring the cases that needed to be brought. So that's my starting point here. And I don't want to ever see the department get into that type of mode again. And I don't think they're in that mode now, and I'm not suggesting that. They won, for example, the Katie Holmes case was a big case for them to win. I mean, they took her on, and, when you read the newspaper reports, you really don't know how the trial's going. But they won that case, in my view.
So you mean Elizabeth Holmes?
Yeah, Elizabeth Holmes, not Katie Holmes. There's my defamation case. I just made it. So, no, but I thought Elizabeth Holmes got, prosecuted, and it was a tough trial, and they won it. And they went after a CEO in a fraudulent scheme. And I thought that was, a great victory. They did a lot of hard work in that case. And so, on the other hand, they won the Roger Ung case, and I know you've been writing a lot about that. And that sounded like a really tough case, because you had Tim Leissner as your cooperating witness. And so I just don't want to see the department going back to where it was back in 2008, 2009. And I don't get the sense that they are, but they've had some, tough losses lately. I mean, in the Mark Faulkner case, the Boeing one, which we can talk about a little bit, the jury was out 90 minutes. And the jury came back, and jurors came back and apologized to him in the hallway. Okay, they said they were sorry that he was prosecuted. I mean, that's something's wrong, Tom, when you bring a criminal case and the jury comes out and apologizes to the defendant. Do you know what I mean? Something is missing in that story that they told. So, look, these are high stakes trials. I get it, but to me, you always say, and I think you've said this too, that you win your case at the investigation level, at the grand jury level. Who are your witnesses? How are you collecting the evidence? How are you building your case? And I think there's another issue which we should probably discuss a little bit, is when you outsource these investigations to the big firms, and Boeing was outsourced to several massive investigation, they don't have the same incentives that line prosecutors do. Line prosecutors want to build a case and flip people and make it into a bigger case and go as high into the organization as they can. I don't believe that outsourced investigations have the same sort of drive to do that. So, it's an interesting point. Just one last comment on the Antitrust Division. Look, the Antitrust Division won a big case against the CEO of Bumblebee, who they prosecuted him for price fixing in the tuna fish market. And they won. And the jury was not out that long at all in that case. And it was a hard-fought case. So the department in the Antitrust Division, they've had some, they're pretty aggressive, and they've had some good luck. Recently, they've taken it on the chin. They've had 2 mistrials of the chicken producers cartel in Denver. And I've never seen this. A federal judge dragged out the assistant attorney general, the head of the Antitrust Division, and said, "Are you sure you want to do a third one?" And the assistant attorney general said, I'll think about it. Thank you very much, Your Honor. But then turned around and said, "We're going forward."
So, Mike, in the FCPA world, obviously, we don't have very many cases going to trial.
Right.
And from my perspective, maybe the bellwether or the watershed was the Gunstein cases.
Right.
From the Gunstein cases forward, we had really just a complete paucity of cases until the Hoskins case, and now we have the Ung case. But if we kind of take the FCPA cases and the antitrust cases that you wrote about in your blog post series, which we'll link to in the show notes, it seemed to me that you had a couple of different criticisms. In the Gunstein case, I think you were critical of the way the cases were prosecuted at trial.
Right.
In the cartel around price or wage fixing and wage setting cases, you had a different criticism, which was around, I think, the way the evidence was presented. And then in the Fortner case, the Boeing case, the criticism was not so much the presentation of the trial strategy, or rather the presentation or the theory. It was the underlying facts, which pointed to systematic failure around safety up and down the organization, and the inability from the original internal investigation to point to one person, and that
Right.
only one person was prosecuted. So I was wondering if you could tell us what you saw was the fault in the theories, and if you or their presentations at trial, and how does one as a prosecutor think through either the legal theory you're going to use, or how are you going to present it? And if you can't come up with adequate solutions, does that mean the case shouldn't be brought?
Well, look, there's a real, there's a real art or a real sense of charging a case and structuring it in a way that you can present it and that it's going to be compelling and to the jury. And I have a couple thoughts on that with regard to, first off, the gun sting case. What was that? The SHOT Show sting case. That was a really tough case because and it was subject to entrapment defenses, and you had a cooperating witness in that case who was really difficult to sell to the jury. That he was actually presented as sort of worse than some of the defendants. And you set yourself up when the government uses an undercover with money to an entrapment defense, so that you better have a lot of evidence that the defendants who get ensnared in this were predisposed or had committed crimes on other occasions. And I think there were a lot of defendants there that they didn't have that kind of evidence. It was too broad of a case. And that case, you're right, it stung so badly that I think it held back the FCPA prosecutors for years in bringing individual cases. Now, the antitrust division cases, first off with the chicken cases, what I didn't understand about the way they were indicted was you had 10 individuals from separate companies put in one trial. And I know from doing multi-defendant cases, it's hard enough for a jury to stick with 5 or 6 defendants, but to put 10 and put on some evidence that goes against one versus the other, it's really difficult for the jury to keep track of everything. What I didn't understand is they had some companies that they could have indicted with some of the individuals. You always have to think about, where is the jury going to compromise? How strong is your evidence? What is the bulk of your evidence? And so the chicken cases, they've had 2 cooperating witnesses testify who say, yeah, we were part of the conspiracy. We agreed on bidding and all that. The wage fixing case, the 2 acquittals, one of them occurred involving in Dallas, a very narrow case, Dallas physical therapists who were the outsourcing rates and how much they're paid. I have a feeling that first off, there was a really debated jury instruction that was given in that case, which said that they had to prove that there was substantial impact on the market from the agreement. And I think that was a bad instruction. They should have litigated that more. But number 2, I don't think, when you look at the case, Dallas better than I do, Tom. But the two physical therapy outsourced providers, I don't know how much of I'm not saying that what they did was right. I'm just saying in terms of having a compelling case, it seems a little bit questionable. The other case, though, the other one that they lost, the wage fixing case, it was really interesting, and not many people have written about it. DaVita, the company, went to trial and was acquitted. This was one of the rare cases where the defense, and by the way, they had a lot to lose. If they lost that case, they might have been excluded from certain healthcare programs. But DaVita rolled the dice along with the former CEO of DaVita this was in, I think it was Texas again, or I may be wrong in terms of where the market was, where there were agreements in terms of getting professionals, higher ups in the dialysis business. And to me, the company said, we're going to trial. Now we don't see that. And I think the last time we saw that in the FCPA arena was that California company years and years ago, which was convicted and it was privately owned. Now, the Faulkner case is more compelling because the jury saw through the weakness of the case. And the defense was smart. They said, look, my guy is here. He's a, early 40-year-old family guy who's being blamed for the 737 MAX safety scandal. Now, I mean, I'm not saying he was an angel in this, but when you read the Delaware Chancery Court's decision outlining the culture and all the problems at Boeing, you walk away saying somebody knew up higher up than him. And the jury acquitted him in 90 minutes because they believed it. They think he was being a scapegoat. He was being the scapegoat. And I mean, the Justice Department bringing that case was really, really challenging. And you know what? It also looks like, when the BP oil rig blew up, Deepwater Horizon, those cases they had against some of the engineers, those melted away too. And so it's really hard when you have an organizational failure. But I do believe if you had real prosecutors who were committed to digging out the evidence and what did people know and what did they say about the safety issues, I bet you would have found people higher up who were responsible. I just do. And I think the jury saw that. So they had a sense of fairness with that.
So, Mike, one of your other interesting points around the Gunstein cases, I thought, was that I don't want to say it was wrongly charged, but you pointed out that they were charged with multiple defendants were charged with conspiracy, yet there was really no evidence of any overarching conspiracy. Perhaps there would, if there was conduct, it wasn't conduct conspired together. And if it was conspired, it was because of the entrapment or opportunity that the department itself created. It was that, did I read that right as well?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. You can't conspire with a government informant. I mean, you can't have a conspiracy with the government informant. It just, you can't, they don't count because they're the government actor. And you're right that there were several broad conspiracies that were brought, and charged. But if you remember some of the facts going back, first off, you had a difficult presentation that was of the cooperating witness in the case, the person who himself had problems in the industry, and ultimately, I believe, went to jail for 5 years, if I'm not correct, not wrong, or several years. I can't remember. But he cooperated, but he was tied up with FCPA issues, and he ultimately, tried to flip and make these cases for the government. The government also had a lot of sort of weaknesses in the case where they had unrecorded contacts. They also had instances where the defendants were asking the cooperator, is this legal for us to do this on tape? And one of my clients was one of those who said, are you sure this is okay? Is this legal? And he, the cooperator just hemmed and hawed. Well, that's not like, really strong evidence that this guy was acting with criminal intent. He's trying to find out, is this right? Now, of course, he didn't go and hire, a big name lawyer or anything to do that. But so there, you're right. There's charging decisions. There also is, Tom, there are also, I think, times when, people trust the government and people don't trust the government. And when you run a defense of like the government bungled this, I think juries are more willing to listen sometimes, depending upon how they feel about the government, to those kinds of things. On the other hand, I've seen some other trials, involving clients and, people that I knew. And, the government's doing pretty well in a lot of white collar cases that are sort of on standard, run of the mill type of cases, securities fraud cases. People are upset right now about rich people, and they think that rich people are have a unfair break or unfair lead in the economy. So I think they end up getting hurt when they go to trial.
So, Mike, now I'd like you to ask you maybe to speculate down the road, and I would preface it with echoing your comments from the Deputy Attorney General, I believe, or Assistant Attorney General, who had to go to court around the chicken price fixing cases and
Yeah.
announce, take a lecturing from the judge, who has announced there'll be a third prosecution. Just yesterday or over the weekend, Lena Khan, the head of the FTC, said that they would continue to be aggressive. I recognize the FTC generally brings civil actions, nevertheless, active now in the antitrust sphere. But where do you see the department moving forward in light of the failures at trial, but also with the successes that you've talked about, the Roger Ung trial, the Elizabeth Holmes trial,
Those
both
are big wins. Yeah.
major successes. Would you see a renewed vigor around prosecution from this administration?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And let's start first with the antitrust division. First off, you have the AAG, Assistant Attorney General's Jonathan Cantor. And right now, he has bipartisan support to be aggressive, not only in the criminal area, but in the civil area. And I was surprised, he showed up, the judge, sort of lectured him and said, please look at the U.S. attorney or the federal prosecution's manual and, look at the factors, weigh them carefully. And then he gave a speech 3 or 4 days later and said, we're not going to become the chicken shit club, meaning we're not going to run away from this and we're going to do this. And they restructured the case. The case was against 10 defendants. They dismissed against 5 with prejudice. And they assigned some additional attorneys or different attorneys to try the case. So he said, look, we're not going to run away. And I think, and Runaway is one of my favorites from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, because the department in 2008, 2009, when they saw that rabbit of fraud, they ran away. Now, I admire Jonathan Cantor for saying, we're going to go forward with it, and we'll see what happens. But he also is doing the same in the civil context. They brought more merger cases. They have the Google case. FTC has the Facebook case. That's going on. Now, I think the one to watch now are FCPA cases, because that Roger Ung case, that was a big win, Tom, because to me, that was the biggest trial they've had, since when? The Shot Show Sting cases? That case, they were really challenged in it. To me, it's, as I've told you before, the Goldman Sachs case was the most important case I think ever brought, because it was right in the core area of what the FCPA is trying to prevent, which is sovereign wealth, money that's being stolen from the development of an economy to benefit the lower economic classes in Malaysia was stolen by Goldman Sachs. It's outrageous. And Roger Ung, it's an interesting. I mean, I'd actually like to read the trial transcript just to read and just to follow it. But he had to explain, in a sense, and you and I talked about this before. He had 36 million sitting in his bank accounts, and that was alleged to be proceeds from, at least part of it, proceeds from the bribery scheme. And they put on the government put on Tim Leisner as the major cooperating witness, who apparently was married more than once, to two women at the same time, lied about a divorce, whatever. He had so many lies he couldn't keep it all straight. But what was interesting was that Roger Ung put on a defense, and he had his wife get up and testify with no documentation and say, basically, the 36 million came from an investment we made years ago, or she made, I think, years ago, at 6 or 7 million and turned into 36. And I think the jury knew that was incredible. And I think they lost points that way. Instead of keeping the focus on Leisner, they put on a defense like that. Now, but I do think it was a big win. It must have been, what, 4 to 6 week trial, I believe, Tom.
6 weeks.
6 weeks, yeah. And the jury was out for 50 hours, is what I recall. And that's a long time. You get nervous when the jury's out there. There's nothing worse when a jury's out. And you're nervous as the prosecutor. But I'll tell you what, and they also had a discovery snafu early on in the case, remember, where they hadn't turned over materials inadvertently, where they had to delay the case for a while while the defense got to review some of the documents, or the material. So I think we're going to see a more aggressive FCPA because in general, this administration has promised it. And I think they're going to eventually come through. I mean, look, we saw the first corporate settlement come out, and of course it includes an independent compliance monitor. It also includes consideration of, the companies, all their bad acts, in the past. Seeing something different, that they didn't have a criminal history, but they referenced that they had some regulatory violations in the past. The remediation wasn't sufficient, even though they had an enhanced compliance program. They hadn't completed the remediation or tested it. I think the FCPA unit right now in the criminal division are going to hold people to a higher standard than we're used to over the last 8 to 10 years.
Mike, the next potential big FCPA case, certainly that I'm watching, is the Cognizant Technologies case. And there we have former CEO and general counsel criminally indicted. Now, they were indicted under prior administration, so it's really nothing to do with this administration, at least bringing the charges. And it looks like one of the key defenses is going to be the underlying investigation, internal investigation turned over to the government, which led to the basis or formed the basis of the criminal charges against the two individuals. If those suppositions are correct, do you see that this case will put directly in focus internal investigations and really challenge those in a way that they haven't been challenged in open court as yet?
Yeah, I've been waiting for this day and predicting it'll come at some point, because when you have you have to be careful when an internal investigation is conducted that you are not perceived to be acting as an arm of the government. And there have been some judges. There was, I think it was Chief Judge McMahon from New York who wrote about this. She was concerned about it, and she sort of just went off on this issue. And that is that eventually, are we going to get to the point where the internal investigation actors are going to be held accountable as prosecutors would be? So, for example, your ability to take a statement from somebody and then turn it over to the government for use by the government. um, can be challenged as if it was government actors. I don't think that's going to happen in this case, but I don't think they have much else of a defense. It always seemed like a pretty strong case to me because you have, I think, two of the four people in the room are cooperating witnesses when they were, having open discussions about the bribery scheme. But I may be wrong on that. But I think it's going to be a tough case nonetheless because they're going to put the government on trial, and that's about their best defense that they can do. And if the jury thinks it was unfair somehow, then I think it's going to get dicier. But that's a big trial, and I don't know when that's scheduled. Do you know when that's scheduled to go to trial? Is it this
I
year?
believe October 2022.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be a bit. That's definitely going to be a big one. So, but I do think we're going to see more people indicted. Um, they've been indicting the FCPA unit as, working with U.S. attorneys' offices. They've been indicting a lot of people in Texas and Florida connected to money laundering, PDVSA, and Venezuela. And I think we're going to see more all around the country growing out of some of these corporate cases.
Well, Mike, as always, very informative when I get the chance to sit down and chit chat with you. I wanted to thank you again for the 3-part series. I thought it was great, a great review of both foibles and wins by the Department of Justice. And hopefully we will have the opportunity to visit on this topic in the future.
Absolutely. Really enjoy it, Tom. Always love talking to you. All the best.